Hi, I'm Doug Boynton, and you're listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition. It's the end of the year, so we wanted to take a look back and highlight the WHRO stories we felt were the most engaging and impactful in 2024. With that in mind, we revisit a few stories from our Democracy at Work series that demonstrated the oft-ignored and unheralded civic duties. What's the latest update on the Norfolk families who say their kids received targeted harassment because they are Latino? And remember the Norfolk and Newport news communities that battled coal dust pollution? We'll hear how that fight has played out. Those stories and more are just around the corner. It's WHRO's Weekly Edition. Have you had a chance to get your palms read since the City Council in Norfolk legalized it back in June? Well, WHRO's Ryan Murphy sat down with a woman who's been reading palms in Norfolk since the 50s and never knew it was technically illegal.
I'm Samantha Weaver, and I'm a palmist, and I have been doing this for 68 years. You're reading the lines and the molds and the mounds that appear in the hand. People are so surprised and so unbelieving of what is actually in their palm and what's available that you can see. You can see if your man's cheating on you. You can see if a baby's coming. You can see if... Okay, here's the reading room. And your right hand.
Okay.
So... you can see that this is your lifeline. Do you see how that is? When it's cut or broke like that, you have a higher chance of wanting to drink, wanting to get into drugs or do any kind of a thing like that. But it doesn't, because you catch it. So here it's not split open, so you're not in that problem now. You're in a mild receive here, meaning you got probably 75% chance now of winning the lottery if you buy one wallet. But the darker, the deeper it gets, the more likely you are. My grandmother was known as the bog witch or the healer woman, conjure woman. And so I picked it up at a very early age. And I was reading all my classmates by the time we moved here to Norfolk. My best friend had a birthday party, and her mother wanted me to read palms, and she gave me $5 in 1958. And so that was my professional outcome, because I got paid for it. It was a lot of money to me as a 7-year-old child. I surely didn't realize it was illegal totally on the thing. It was a shock to me when I heard about that, and I'm glad that they voted that 7-1. I think that a lot of that was naval influence of us having a Navy base that's here, and they didn't want them to be going there and getting ripped off. I can remember downtown Norfolk in the late 50s, early 60s, and there was a lot of women down there that did a lot of things. And one of the things that they did, and the sailors were the ones that they're targeting back at that time, and they would charge an arm and a leg. I know that the ones that were reading downtown at that time were certainly not readers. They were in another line of work. But I'm glad I didn't know they were voting on it. I mean, I would have been sick to my stomach if I'd have known they were going to bring this back up at this particular time. I look at it as a gift from God that maybe we can correct some of the way that people think and get a better reputation for people that are very committed to this. This has been my lifelong thing, and it hurts my feelings when people put me in the category of fraud. Back in the early 50s, some people that would be at the different churches would say, oh, don't go to a fortune teller. And I've been at parties and people will talk despairingly about it. And I've had, when I was in my dating years early on, I remember I would say to a guy, if they were very religious or something like that, they'd think, oh, you're a palm reader, okay. And that was the end of that romance. But when you hit nobody else, who are you going to go to? I think they come to psychics and people like myself that can offer them something out of the ordinary. It's sad to me that you have to come to a stranger and pay a stranger to listen to you, to hear, to tell you things that give you hope. That part of it is sad to me. But I think that just like there's doctors, just like there's psychiatrists, just like there's all sorts of people that treat different parts of us, humans, I treat the soul.
In the wake of the Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade, women in the military have created an underground railroad-like system to help one another when military health care falls short. After the Dobbs decision overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022, military women created an underground system to help one another when their military health care falters. WHRO's Steve Walsh gave us an inside look at what those women faced.
You can grab a seat wherever, couch, whatever.
Staff Sergeant Octavia James is in the Air Force Reserves. She's already helped several airmen struggling to find abortion care, and she says she would do it again.
I would. And I'm going to get a little bit emotional, but I would. Because I know that if I didn't have that support, what would I do? And you don't want to turn your back on someone, especially in the military, because suicide rates are so high. 2
women even stayed in her apartment in Norfolk, Virginia. She remembers helping one of them out of the shower when her sedation was slow to wear off. James and other service members describe an underground railroad of soldiers, sailors, and airmen helping one another. One airman didn't want to go to her supervisor.
Her commander was someone who was very, very religious, very religious. She's like, I can't go to my commander for this.
The airman showed James one of her texts from her supervisor.
I don't believe you, or you're lying, or I think you're trying to get out of work, or you're just trying to get out of this deployment that's coming up. And she's like, no, I'll do all of those things, but this is just what I need right now.
When the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022, the Dobbs decision made it difficult for women stationed around the U.S. to navigate changing state laws to find care in the community. In addition, the Hyde Amendment, which has been in place for decades, continues to restrict spending on abortion for troops and employees of the Department of Defense.
And you have a driver here on site? Okay. All right, hon. Just have a seat. They'll call you back in a few moments.
Virginia Beach has become part of an informal network of military towns, seeing an uptick in military clients as state laws change. When Florida imposed a 6-week ban, more women headed north. Marin Sinicola is a nurse at Planned Parenthood in Virginia.
I think a lot of military folks have friends in other areas with a high military population, right? So if I'm stationed in Jacksonville, I might know someone in Virginia Beach that I can stay with.
In most cases, women must find care outside the military and pay for it themselves. Military doctors will only perform abortions in cases of rape, incest, and where the life of the mother is at stake.
I'm not trying to make light of the very real issues that civilian women have of cost, but you do not need your boss's legal permission to travel. That is the first hurdle that active duty servicewomen deal with. The second is you do not choose where you live.
Caitlin Clausen is a former Army captain. She's now at the University of Pennsylvania researching how women in the military access abortion. Many women say they have a difficult time even getting good information on their options.
As a healthcare provider, we can do better for these servicewomen who have volunteered to serve our country, and we should do better.
The military itself has done very little of its own research on abortion. Clausen is searching chat rooms and private Facebook groups to find her subjects.
There are participants who've discussed, I ended up having to disclose to my chain of command that I had a pregnancy. And I had the procedure done on Saturday. And when I came in on Monday, I was forced to take a PT test. Push-ups, sit-ups, and a 2-mile run.
With the help of military women, NPR posted requests for interviews on some of the same sites. We offered to withhold the name of an officer who talked about her experience as a young ensign. The officer fears if her name is known, it could still affect her career. She detailed the embarrassment after her medical information was not kept confidential. In 2019, she was based in San Diego. After she complained of nausea, the medical team told her commander she was pregnant even before giving her the required blood test.
Just shocked, blindsided, upset, definitely. At the very minimum, if they had done that, I would have appreciated a heads up.
She says her commanders were preparing paperwork to have her removed from the ship before she could tell them that she decided not to keep the baby. Then others on the ship found out.
They don't take you as seriously, or little by little undermines your ability to get the job done.
Finding abortion care used to be a problem for women stationed on ships or in places around the world where abortion was illegal. Increasingly, women inside the U.S. find themselves hundreds of miles away from a private clinic.
My son was 6 months at the time. I had also suddenly lost my mom unexpectedly right before I gave birth. So mentally, I could not handle another kid.
An Air Force sergeant had transferred from Germany to Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota just after the Dobbs decision. NPR offered to withhold her name. The remote base hosts part of the U.S. nuclear arsenal. She and her husband drove more than 4 hours to the only clinic in North Dakota. She says her Air Force provider seems sympathetic but hands-off.
I did not get any information from him. The other resources I got was from the Red Rivers Health Clinic.
Soon after her visit, the clinic shut down when the state's near-total abortion ban took effect.
The hold will remain in place as long as the Pentagon's illegal abortion policy remains in place.
After the Dobbs decision, Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama held up confirmation of all top military appointments for months. He said it was to protest a Defense Department policy that pays for travel and leave for women who may have to go out of state to seek an abortion. Only 12 women used the program in the first 7 months, according to the Pentagon. Advocates say if doctors issued the leave, women wouldn't have to go through their commands. There are still deep concerns that having an abortion could follow someone throughout their career. Even taking a pregnancy test can feel like an illicit act.
I was in a gas station bathroom because I didn't want to take a pregnancy test into the dorms because I was afraid, what if someone finds this in the trash?
Air Force Colonel Sharon Arana is stationed at Langley, Virginia. In 2009, she was in officers' training school in Alabama. She remembers her and her husband stopping at a gas station to take a pregnancy test. She now leads an Air Force group that looks at barriers women face in the Air Force, including access to abortion.
A lot of the people who in the military who are getting abortions right now are those of our airmen who are still in training or living in the dorms. And so they're young, right? They don't know the policy. They haven't learned yet how to advocate for themselves, and they are kind of beholden to their leadership to take care of them.
Arana has reached out to hundreds of current and former airmen. One woman sold her car to pay for an abortion. The overturning of Roe v. Wade makes the strict limits imposed by the Hyde Amendment even more unworkable, she says. Arana is now seeking solutions outside the military. She says she's working with University of Pennsylvania researchers to design a private website to help military women find good and timely information about their options. The Department of Defense responded to requests for comment by referring NPR to the list of existing Pentagon policies. For NPR News, I'm Steve Walsh.
November elections saw the Democratic ticket of Kamala Harris carry Virginia, and incumbent Senator Tim Kaine won a third term. Incumbent mayors swept all local contests to be reelected. WHRO's Barry Graham fills us in.
This month, Democratic electors cast the state's 13 electoral votes for Vice President Kamala Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Harris carried the state with 51% of the vote, to Republican nominee Donald Trump's 46%. Virginia has chosen Democrat candidates in the past 4 presidential elections, stretching back to Barack Obama in 2008. Harris ran up big margins in the state's metro regions, including Richmond and Hampton Roads. However, her win was 3 points less than Joe Biden's 54% in 2020. Democratic incumbent Tim Kaine handily won a third term, defeating Navy veteran and Trump-backed candidate Hung Cao. Kaine is the junior senator behind Mark Warner and has never lost an election in the state. He was Hillary Clinton's vice presidential running mate in 2016. In local races, incumbent mayors all swept to re-election. In Portsmouth, Shannon Glover fended off a challenge from Vice Mayor Lisa Lucas Burke to attain a second 4-year term. In Chesapeake, Rick West, mayor since 2017, held off council member Don Carey. Norfolk saw Kenny Alexander, first elected in 2016, win another term, and in a crowded Virginia Beach mayoral race, Bobby Dyer won with 41% of the vote, beating back 4 challengers. Suffolk saw the closest race of the night, with City Mayor Mike Duman eking out a 164-vote win over challenger Clinton Jenkins. In Hampton, incumbent Donnie Tuck chose to not seek another term after 8 years in office. Current Vice Mayor Jimmy Gray easily won election to the seat. Barry Graham, WHRO News.
In the lead up to the November elections, the Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism at WHRO told the stories of regular people who make our democracy function through their career, activism, or volunteer work. In January 2018, balance of power in the state legislature was determined by drawing a name out of a ceramic bowl. That historic moment wouldn't have happened without a Newport News poll worker named Ken Mallory. VCIJ at WHRO's Lou Hansen broke down the story and its fallout all these years later.
Well, I'll call to order this meeting of the Virginia State Board of Elections this morning on January 4th, 2018. We're here today to conduct a drawing to determine the winner of the House of Delegates 94th District. And this election will certainly be a reminder for everybody that every vote counts, as we encourage all eligible.
I was firmly ensconced in my house. It was winter break and I was a teacher, so I was happy to be at home. My name is Ken Mallory. I'm 40 years old. I work for Virginia Tech. I'm the director of what we call our Citizen Leader Track program in the Virginia Tech Corps of Cadets. I chose to become an election official in the fall of 2008. The registrar in Newport News at the time put out a call in the daily press that Newport News was anticipating record high turnout. And it was great. You're there at 5 a.m., you don't leave until 8 or 9 at night, but I had a blast.
A surprise historic ruling in a tight race in Hampton Roads, and the 94th District could decide who controls the House in Virginia.
For years, the House of Delegates had kind of swung one way or the other, Republican or Democrat, just depending on a few key races. And it seemed like that year was one of the key races was going to be the 94th District, which encompasses Newport News. The 94th, which at the time was being represented by Republican David Yancey, was being closely challenged by Shelley Simons. We had no idea how close it was ultimately going to end up being. The losing candidate, who in this case was Shelley Simons, I think it was 13 votes if my memory serves me correctly, which was well within the percentage that allowed her to request a recount. The registrar calls me and said, hey, would you like to be one of the recount officials? I had no idea how the process works, so I said, count me in. You don't actually look at every single ballot that was cast. The machine counts it. Well, there are some ballots that the machine doesn't know what to do with. Those types of ballots were the ballots that we as recount officials were to look at and engage with. There was one important one. I was like, hey, mark next to the Republican name here, I think this is a Republican ballot. My counterpart said, no, you can't say that because he didn't actually fill in the ballot. We don't know what this voter's intent was. Ultimately, I was persuaded by his argument, and so it went into the unreadable pile. Got to the end of the day, the electoral board goes behind a curtain for a little bit, comes back out and said, all right, we've got an announcement. The electoral board reported that it had been a 14-vote swing and that Shelley Simons had won by 1 vote. My thought immediately flashed back to that one ballot that we'd argued about. It should have gone in the third pile. It was not for us to decide. I was able to make it home for dinner. It's the week that the family gets together. Everyone wants to know how it went. And I'm like, but there's this one ballot. And the more I talked about it, the more bothered I kind of got it. And so I was like, while my memory's fresh, I should really write this down in case someone has any questions. I was in the process of typing when my phone rings. Hello, I'm the legal representation for the Yancey campaign, and I'd like to ask you some questions about today. Once I got the okay to actually talk to the attorney, it was actually kind of relief. The attorney started asking questions, and they very quickly drilled down to that one ballot. And he was like, hey, would you mind writing up a statement? Sure, no problem. And he was like, great. When can I get it from you? I pulled in at about 7 o'clock to work that morning, and he meets me at my school. The election recount was due to be certified that day in circuit court. The judges decided that, yes, they were going to open the letter. The electoral board, when questioned by the court, said, yes, we're confident we can find that one ballot. The judges decided to look at it and decided to count that ballot's vote, which in that case was a vote for David Yancey.
There sat the stoneware bowl in the middle of the table with the Board of Elections, and Yancey's name was placed in a tube, and Democrat Shelley Simon's name was placed in another tube. Well, both tubes were then placed in the bowl. The winning tube was drawn, and inside was David Yancey's name.
I gave the institution enough information for our process to be able to work. We accept in this society that sometimes the choice of the people is not necessarily your choice, but the choice of the people is a fair choice. And when I was a poll worker, that's something that I always strove for.
For VCIJ at WHRO, I'm Lou Hansen.
Continuing the series, WHRO's Sienna Morales took us to Richmond to meet Richard Walker, an advocate for voting rights restoration.
And we're doing a series of what I'd like to call fish fries, get out the vote, to get those folk aware of the purpose and the importance of voting and registering to vote, of getting their rights restored. Fish brings out the best in people. It at least brings them out. So my organization, Bridging the Gap in Virginia, as well as others, have traveled throughout the state of Virginia, checking the statuses of individuals to see if they were a part of that group that were released or were given their rights back by the previous administrations. So there's still a whole lot of individuals out there that have no clue that their rights have been restored. I grew up in East Orange, New Jersey. My mother, my grandmother pretty much raised us, and it was mandatory for us to go with them when we were young to the polling place, and it was ingrained in us that when you turn 18, you will be going to the voting polls. I was ultimately incarcerated and spent 2 years in prison in this Commonwealth of Virginia. I was released in 2005. And that's when I discovered and found out in the Commonwealth of Virginia, if you're a convicted felon, you lose your right to vote, you lose your right to be on a jury, you lose your right to be a public notary, and you lose your right to run for public office. So that was unheard of. I knew nothing about that. I became angry behind it, and then that's when I started advocating against it.
A federal judge has rejected a lawsuit challenging how Governor Glenn Youngkin restores voting rights for convicted felons released from prison.
The judge saying the process might not be transparent or even fair, but it is legal.
We know that the numbers are not increasing for those individuals that are being restored by this governor. That much we do know. When I came out of prison, and realized that, there's a whole lot of folk that are probably far worse off than me, whether it be individuals being incarcerated forever or being not allowed to vote forever, being disenfranchised when they come out of incarceration, that they have to apply to a man, to an individual, to get their constitutional rights restored back to them. Yeah, it became bigger than me. Yeah. Selfless service without looking for accolades and awards. Yeah, that's how I look at it, What I do doesn't normally turn into a paycheck. What I do has an impact on a lot of people. Civil service, any type of service to your community helps the longevity of the community to exist, helps the flourishing, thriving of a community. Having the ability to vote, having the ability to travel, having the ability to run for office, having the ability to live and thrive in a community or country without any repercussions or without any disenfranchisements, without being segregated, without being denied opportunities, without being eliminated from society. A fair chance of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Simply put, yeah, That's democracy.
Having just gone through a very active election season, can you tell me, where are we now with the law? Have you heard of any upcoming General Assembly plans to deal with the issue?
Yeah, it sounds like Virginia Democrats this year have a plan for next year to amend the state constitution to automatically restore voting rights after people are released from prison. And previously, a proposed constitutional amendment passed the General Assembly in 2021, but it died in a subcommittee in 2022. So they're trying to bring that back.
Okay. Sienna, thanks so much for bringing us up to date on the story.
Thank you, Barry. Have a great day.
There's been a little fish at the center of a decades-long fight in Virginia. This year, advocates worried that overfishing for menhaden has been harming the ecosystem in the Chesapeake Bay. The industry, however, said there's no evidence of that. Scientists need more research to settle that debate, but as WHRO's Catherine Hafner reported, state lawmakers would need to foot the bill.
Quite pleasant right now.
On a breezy afternoon, Captain Chris Dollar steers his boat across the water in Gloucester, Virginia. Dollar owns a charter fishing business and has spent his whole life along the Chesapeake Bay, so he's seen a lot of menhaden. He says they're not the most glamorous fish.
They're not, I wouldn't call them ugly, but I wouldn't call them, poster children for the Chesapeake writ large.
But the menhaden has become a kind of poster child for the Chesapeake Bay. The small, silver fish are a crucial part of the bay's ecosystem. They're a key food source for everything from ospreys to bigger fish like striped bass that local sport fishers treasure. Now, Dollar and others worry menhaden are at risk of disappearing. He says he sees drastically fewer fish than he used to.
The density of the schools, where it might be, size of a football field, is now just maybe a tennis court. And you see those smaller and smaller numbers.
Sport fishing and conservation groups pin the blame on one company, Omega Protein. It's the last player from an industry that once spanned the East Coast, harvesting menhaden from Maine to Florida. Virginia is the last place on the Atlantic that allows this type of fishing, which turns millions of menhaden into fish meal and fish oil. It's been controversial for decades, but in recent years, it's become even more heated. Local fishermen sometimes post videos of Omega's boats on social media, complaining about the scale of the industry, which uses purse seines or giant nets to scoop up massive swarms of menhaden.
Absolutely destroying what's left of the Chesapeake Bay.
Critics now want state officials to shut down Omega in the bay, but Omega says the industry is already tightly regulated. Monty Deal is CEO of Ocean Harvesters, which runs Omega's fishing fleet.
First of all, we've been fishing here since 1878. The footprint of menhaden fishing in the Chesapeake Bay is as low now as it's probably been in 60 or 70 years.
He shows me around the company's plant in Reedville, Virginia, and points out giant bins holding the previous day's catch.
Oh, wow.
So that's what a million menhaden looks like.
From these bins, he says, the menhaden move through the plant.
We use 100% of that fish. We cook the fish, we squeeze it, we press it.
The resulting fish meal and fish oil goes into products like pet food and omega-3 supplements. Deal says banning Omega from the Chesapeake Bay would force the whole plant to close, costing more than 200 local jobs. And he says critics are ignoring the data.
They're not being objective about the fishery. They don't understand the fishery, and they're not listening to the science.
That science is at the center of the debate. The overall population of Atlantic menhaden crashed during the 20th century, but it bounced back after commercial fishing was limited. Rob Latour studies menhaden at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science.
Quite frankly, if this were any other species, I think we'd all be celebrating.
But the available data looks at the fish's habitat along the entire East Coast. Critics worry that could obscure a decline happening specifically in the Chesapeake Bay. Latour says that could be true, but it needs to be studied.
I don't fault people for thinking about that, but it's a very complicated thing to actually determine with sufficient evidence scientifically. The things you need to know, we don't know.
Advocates want more research to close that data gap. After a year of negotiations, they hoped Virginia lawmakers would approve a new study this session. But instead, the study was tabled until at least next year.
It's a big disappointment for the bill not to go forward.
Delegate Lee Ware, a Republican from west of Richmond, sponsored the bill.
This species is so important to so many elements of the bay.
Conservation groups say Omega lobbied against the bill, though the company denies that. Dollar, the fishing captain, has been involved with conservation for 30 years. He says there's an old saying in fishery politics.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. Well, I've amended that. When it comes to menhaden, particularly in Virginia, it's an ultra marathon, not just a marathon.
That ultramarathon continues. Advocates are already asking state regulators to halt the fishery until more is known about potential impacts. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
Early in 2024, several Norfolk families said their children were being robbed, attacked, and targeted at school by other students, specifically because they are Latino. Some students left school altogether, while others were forced to face more potential violence to keep learning. WHRO's Ryan Murphy sat down with those families.
Martín Martinez Batista says he was walking to soccer practice when, out of nowhere, he was surrounded by middle school students. He knew they were going to hurt him. The kids hit him for several minutes. Martín was left bleeding from the ears. The laptop he'd used to shield his head was destroyed.
Me estaban diciendo que me estaban pegando porque yo era hispano.
Martín, who came from Honduras 2.5 years ago, says the only thing his attackers said was that they were beating him because he's Hispanic. His story is one of several WHRO heard from families concerned about assaults and robberies of Latino students, particularly immigrants. Patricia Bracknell is the head of the Chamber for Hispanic Progress. Many Latino families have come to her about what their children face at school.
And they're coming from countries where they're running away from violence. And I know at least one parent that sent their son back to South America because they'd rather deal with that violence than the violence that these kids are experiencing in the most developed country in the world.
Some families who have talked to Bracknell are afraid to go to the police or schools because of their citizenship status. For some that did go to the authorities, their concerns were misinterpreted or ignored. Norfolk Public Schools declined multiple requests for interviews about the assaults. The escalation of these attacks mirrors a nationwide rise in crimes against Latinos since 2019. Researchers say bigoted rhetoric from politicians and conspiracy theories have fueled racial violence aimed at the Latino community. Stepbrothers Derek Santos Rodriguez and Leo Medina were attacked by another group of kids outside Norview High in December. Video of the incident shows a teenager holding Derek down and punching him, while 3 others kicked Derek in the head. Eventually, security guards come to break the fight up. Derek and Leo were bruised and cut. Derek spent the night in the hospital and suffered a broken finger. The 2 Latino boys were suspended for fighting and missed a month of school. When Derek returned to school, 3 students showed up at his classroom looking for him. He doesn't know why. His teacher chased them off before they got to him, but he felt unsafe enough to ask his mother, Teresa Rodriguez, to pick him up. It was only 30 minutes into the school day.
Yo como madre me dolió. Si vio el video, le pegan patadas. No sé cuántos, unos 5, 6 adolescentes. Al golpearle su cabeza, le tiraban patadas, golpes, puños. Le hubieran dado un mal golpe, ¿qué hubiera pasado con mi hijo?
Rodriguez says it's hard for her to forget seeing the video of her son getting beat up. She doesn't like letting Derek and Leo out of the house alone anymore.
¿Cómo puedo estar tranquila cuando uno quiere un mejor futuro, que sus hijos estudien? Hace todo lo posible para que ellos estén ahí. Otras madres a la edad de mi hijo ya no los tienen en la escuela. Los mandan a trabajar, nosotros no. Hacemos todo lo posible, trabajamos para que ellos estudien. Pero, ¿cómo estar tranquilos con lo que pasó?
She wonders how she can be comfortable sending her kids to school when this is happening. She knows families that have sent their kids to work instead. Rodriguez doesn't want that for her boys. She wants them to get an education, but that relies on getting them through school safely. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
Norfolk Public Schools is a member of HRETA, which holds the license for the WHRO stations.
Ryan, remind us again the situation that was ongoing when you talked to some of the families, especially around the Norview High School district. What was actually going on, and what were some of the fears the parents were relaying?
So what I was hearing from families was their students were going to school. A lot of them are from immigrant families or families who don't speak a lot of English, who are sort of pretty clearly not American coming into the schools. And so a lot of them said they were being targeted for violence by students at the schools because of their race, because of their, where they came from. And the parents were telling me that when these things would happen, they would go and, try their best to communicate with the schools to tell them this is happening. We're concerned about this. And they said they were just getting totally blown off.
But to your knowledge, no data has been released from the district or from the Department of Justice about anything as far as the investigation, the rise in violence against some of these Hispanic students. You really were unable to put your hands on any specific data regarding what's been going on?
So I have been able to get access after months of fighting with the school system on some emails, internal emails that shed some light on that. It's not a lot. A lot of that is redacted. But as far as I can tell, and as far as anybody will tell me, the investigation is still ongoing. My sources have told me that the Department of Justice investigators were in town just a couple of weeks ago, earlier in December, to talk to school staff, to talk to some of these families, I guess to get more on the ground information. But I've seen emails that show that the Department of Justice has been seeking, documentation around a bunch of, hundreds of these violence cases from across the school district all year long. And, one of the big question marks is there's a new incoming presidential administration and executive branch agencies will likely face some shakeups when that happens. So, is there sort of an urgency to try to get this done before that happens in January? I don't know. I haven't been able to talk to anybody, but some of my sources have expressed concerns that this won't be done by then.
Ryan, thanks for your good work on this, and thanks for the update.
Thank you, Barry.
An interfaith nonprofit sponsored a voluntary firearms surrender event in Hampton over a weekend in October. It is part of a national project that transforms donated guns into garden tools. WHRO's Nick McNamara reports organizers hope they're planting a seed that grows into a bigger movement in Hampton Roads.
You know the phrase, strike while the iron's hot? There's good wisdom in that. And you get about 10 seconds.
Reverend Michael Burnett strikes a red-hot piece of metal fresh from a mini forge, clad in a suede leather smith's apron and a construction orange stole. The piece is slowly taking the shape of a garden mattock, but just an hour and a half prior,
That was an AR-15 barrel, and now it's on its way to being something that's going to feed somebody, and you have a part of that.
Burnett is a minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ and one of the people behind a recent safe firearms surrender in Hampton. The surrender event and forging demonstration was sponsored by the James River chapter of the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, a nonpartisan coalition of faith communities that advocate on a variety of issues in the Commonwealth, including preventing gun violence.
Hampton Roads is no stranger to gun violence. We have some cities here that are in the list of the most violent cities in the country, and there is a reality to that.
The chapter is just one participant in a growing national project called Guns to Gardens, which takes donations of unwanted firearms and transforms them into garden tools. It takes inspiration from a biblical verse in the book of Isaiah, portending that one day people would hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. The concept originated more than 10 years ago with a co-op called Raw Tools in Colorado Springs, which has since expanded to Philadelphia and a location in Asheville, North Carolina. Called Raw Tools South, it partners with the blossoming group of organizers in Hampton Roads. The organization sells tools and art pieces made from donated firearms and offers free tools to donors made from their unwanted weapons. Raw Tools also provides nonviolence training and resources through its workshops and demonstrations.
As much as I love doing it, I hope we're not the only ones doing it. I hope there are so many folks participating in this movement within 5 years that we are just a blip on the radar. That'd be a beautiful thing.
Organizers moved quickly after Hurricane Helene devastated Asheville, making it impossible for Raw Tools South to get to Hampton for the most recent event. Burnett stepped in at the Forge, trained in basic blacksmithing skills about a year ago. Aaron Aliff of Metalworks in Yorktown volunteered to help cut and disassemble donated guns.
A lot of things came through at the last minute yesterday. It was just shy of miraculous, if it can be said it was shy of it.
For Kate McGaw, though, it was a difficult morning.
I don't know. Emotions are still about as raw as that material being chopped up right now.
McGaw is a Williamsburg resident and member of Moms Demand Action Virginia. She brought her late husband Carl's hunting guns to donate to the project.
I thought this would be a nice way to kind of honor him, turning some of his beloved guns into some artwork, garden artwork.
You want to give it a go there, Kate?
After seeing them dismantled, she took a turn swinging a hammer down on the barrel of a rifle donated ahead of her that Saturday.
That's all right, we can fix it. Everything can be fixed. All right, yeah,
Oh, that was something else. I think a bit of aggression coming out there, I think. Especially when I learned that was an AR-15 barrel, so yeah, even more aggression coming out.
In addition to donors and disciples, local dignitaries, including Hampton Mayor Donnie Tuck, took swings of their own.
The fact that individuals be willing to turn in weapons and to have that converted into a garden tool, I think that's tremendous. There's a lot for that particular individual.
Though donations came in at a slow pace, Burnett says it's just the beginning for the project in Hampton Roads.
Any guns we take off the street is better than none. And moreover, it's the presence in the community. It's letting folks know we're here. It's letting folks know that something like this can be done. And it's making that proclamation. All things can be made new, that violence isn't the final answer.
Nick McNamara, WHRO News.
Nick, this story ran back in October. Has anything new happened?
They haven't had any new surrender events since, but the pastor included in the story, Michael Burnett, he's been up and running with his own shop. He picked up some blacksmithing skills along the way, and he graciously stepped in on the day of the event, given some of the folks from North Carolina being unable to make it up for the actual event day itself after the hurricane. But with his new skills, he has his own shop set up, and he's been taking submissions and donations in. Lately, he's been making these gun barrels into nails for folks to have when Lent comes around. And if you want to reach out to him, you can do so via guns2garden757@gmail.com if you're looking to submit your gun barrel as well. And that's guns2gardens, that being the number 2.
Hey, thanks so much.
Of course.
This is WHRO's Weekly Edition. Remember, for any stories you've missed, you can visit us on the WHRO smartphone app or all social media platforms.
The Nansemond Indian Nation held its annual powwow in Suffolk on land it officially owns all the way back in August. WHRO's Sienna Morales reported live from the tribe's first celebration since it acquired the land.
The Nansemonds are the indigenous people of the Nansemond River. They lived there before English settlers arrived and have been hosting an annual powwow since 1988 on land beside the river in Suffolk. City leaders transferred ownership of the lands to the nation in May. This year is the first powwow since the tribe became official owners again.
It's just a wonderful time of celebration, and the turnout was absolutely huge. And I'd like to think it was people that were coming to help us celebrate for the first time of being the sole owners of this property and tribal land.
That's Assistant Chief David Henneman. The celebration brought together dancers, vendors, and people from different indigenous nations. Henneman says it was also a chance to share Native culture with the public. Sienna Morales, WHRO News.
Norfolk and Newport News residents have long complained about coal dust from nearby rail terminals affecting people's health and homes. They say the state hasn't taken enough action. WHRO's Catherine Hafner reported in March how the communities sought to combat their pollution problem.
When Malcolm Jones hung out in the Lamberts Point neighborhood as a kid, he noticed what appeared like an ever-present sheen of dirt or dust covering everything in sight. Now that he's grown up, he knows what it is, coal dust from the nearby export terminal.
The coal dust is very visible on cars, on doors, on houses. You leave anything outside for a couple of days and you can see coal dust residue on it.
Coal is brought in by train to the massive Norfolk Southern terminal that borders the neighborhood. There, it's loaded onto ships headed around the world. In the meantime, it sits in open, uncovered rail cars. Jones says that allows the dust to spread.
There's times of the day where you can see clouds of dust, especially when they're dropping the load off of the train.
Coal dust is full of toxic metals that are dangerous to people's health and can cause asthma or heart disease. In Lamberts Point, there's not a lot of official data showing these health effects, but residents say it's clear from their own experiences. Jones says when people move away, they notice a big difference.
They had lived in the area for 20, 30 years and had asthma problems the whole time they were here. They left the area and improvement happened.
For decades, Lamberts Point and Southeast Newport News have asked for help controlling the coal dust. Both neighborhoods are majority black. Now a community activist, Jones says it feels like officials have repeatedly ignored their concerns.
It just hurts to be unheard for that long. It just takes away from the trust of the public.
The Environmental Protection Agency recently reiterated how dangerous air pollution is from small particles like coal dust. Christina Fernandez is with the EPA's Mid-Atlantic region.
It's the cause of a lot of premature deaths, hospitalizations, and impacts vulnerable communities like children and elderly.
The agency just announced tighter regulations of this pollution, but the new rules likely won't affect Lamberts Point. Because the Norfolk Southern Terminal was built before modern air regulations, it's not subject to them. The other larger issue is that regulators have limited data about air pollution in Virginia. There are just 17 federal monitors across the whole state due to limited resources. According to those monitors, Virginia already meets the new standards. But critics say that could miss whole swaths of the state, including potential air pollution hotspots like Southeast Newport News. Attorney Aaron Isherwood with the Sierra Club says Hampton Roads can't keep waiting for more data.
I think we all know that there's a problem there, and the community has been waiting a long time for some action.
The first step is getting more local monitoring. The EPA knows it's needed, especially in vulnerable areas. The agency gave Virginia a grant several years ago to set up air monitors in Norfolk and Newport News. Those haven't yet been installed. In the meantime, the state's giving some in the community their own less powerful air sensors to keep an eye on air quality in their backyards. One of those sensors is at Pray First Mission Ministries in Southeast Newport News. Pastor Nathaniel Kurtz points out the small device attached to a shed behind the church. It's made by a company called Purple Air.
And right here is the Purple Air sensor.
Kurtz says the new monitoring is a good first step, but he's still skeptical the state will take meaningful action. He's part of a group called Coal Dust Kills that's now pushing for a new local ordinance in Newport News. They want the city to regulate coal dust as a public nuisance and require physical protections that have been used elsewhere. That could include tall wind fences to curb dust or a dome covering the giant coal piles. State officials say it's premature to consider those strategies until they analyze the data. But Kurtz says there's too much at stake to wait.
Time isn't on our side when it comes to health and environmental justice, because the longer that we wait, there's one more toddler that's breathing coal dust ash into their lungs.
In the meantime, his church is planning to open a daycare. He hopes their new air sensor can at least help determine when it's safe for the kids to play outside. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
Hi, Catherine. Thanks for joining me. So, following up on this story, where do things stand now with those communities in Norfolk and Newport News?
So I would say nothing huge has changed, which is kind of the ongoing story, because they've been asking for change for decades. But DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality in Virginia, is working on setting up regulatory grade air monitors in these communities to gather more data about coal dust issues. Those have yet to go up. I believe they're about to roll them out, so that's kind of where things stand with that. In the meantime, the city of Newport News has actually just applied for a $20 million grant from the EPA. So if they end up getting that, then they could do some real work in the Southeast community.
When you were speaking to these people in those communities, did you get the sense that they felt that there was any light at the end of the tunnel?
I think that they were really shifting focus to the local level instead of, asking the state for solutions that are, state funded or federal funded. They were really looking for city council to take action, and they were feeling like there was momentum there. So that's where they had hope, especially in Newport News rather than Norfolk. Norfolk, there seems to be less momentum at the moment.
Where would the grant money go if Newport News was able to get that grant money?
So I think that's still up in the air, but they mentioned solutions like a cold dome or fence, which are specifically designed to capture some of the dust that's coming off the site. So those are some initial ideas, but it also would probably depend on the parameters of the grant.
All right, Catherine, thank you.
No problem.
"50 years ago, the Old Dominion Monarchs men's basketball team brought the school its first national championship in any team sport. Their intense, lightning-fast offense and smothering defense captivated Norfolk while propelling them to legendary heights in Division II basketball. WHRO's Connor Worley took us through that season and the legacy the team left behind.
Old Dominion basketball coach Sonny Allen staggered into the visiting locker room inside Crenshaw Gym in Ashland. His squad trailed Randolph-Macon by 20 points off the back of missed shots, sloppy turnovers, and a raucous road environment.
It's the first game that I ever played in where you didn't have to be out of bounds to pass the ball in. There was no room to step out of bounds. You got both feet out of bounds and you feel somebody pressing up against you. You tell a referee, hey man, I can't. He said, well, you do whatever you can do.
That's center Wilson Washington. He and his teammates rolled into the locker room dejected at halftime. Guard Joey Carruthers sat on the bench waiting for Coach Allen's frustration.
He basically came in and said, get your man-to-man assignments from Coach Woolen. We're going man-to-man the second half. When the game's over, get on the bus. We're going back to Norfolk.
Allen told his players, either you're winning this game or you're not. Decide in this room.
And he left the locker room.
They came out of the half pressing hard and continuously pushing the ball. They incrementally sliced the lead in the second half to force overtime. Then despite Washington and backup forwards Tommy Street and Gray Eubank fouling out, Old Dominion managed a second overtime. They proved their mettle and finished off Randolph-Macon 86-85 in a pivotal game that decided home court advantage for the regional playoffs. The Virginian Pilot dubbed the game Mayhem in a Matchbox. That mid-February game distilled and bottled the essence of the 1974-75 Monarchs, relentless effort and intensity. And that whole halftime speech, it was one of Allen's classic attempts to motivate the team, says forward Jeff Furman.
It was all a ploy on his part. He knew exactly what he was doing. It's like, what do I got to lose here? I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to try to motivate him just like this. Well, it was an unbelievable game.
After a shaky start to the 1974-75 season, a loss at Dayton and 1-point win against Biscayne, the Monarchs settled into their identity. It was a fast-paced, wear-you-down speed that lit up the scoreboard, says Carol Hudson, the team's manager.
Sonny Allen fast break was kind of innovative back in those days. We could organize fast break. So the fans loved it.
Allen's offensive system was predicated on pushing the ball up the floor in constant movement in the half court to score quickly. Defensively, the Monarchs pressed teams and guarded every inch of the floor. Allen's son Billy helped the team as a high school freshman. He says ODU's pace broke teams down physically.
They put so much pressure on opposing teams that it kind of threw the opposing teams off their game plan because they would work so hard to get back on defense and stop the break that it would wear them down and completely take them out of their original game plan.
The schemes accentuated Carruthers' speed.
In Sonny's system, that was paramount. I mean, you had to be able to get the ball down the court as quickly as possible.
It allowed Washington to take advantage of his height and leaping ability. He'd grab a rebound and quickly find the outlet pass to push the ball up the floor.
To slow us down, you had to slow me down, and I'm going to get my 12, 15, 20 rebounds. And every last one of them, I don't get rebounds and take photos with it.
Opponents were required to play their best to win.
So you got Wilson in the middle, and then the guards we had there that put a lot of pressure on the opponent.
Practices were relentless scrimmaging affairs where the players pushed each other. Players like Eubank, Street, Jay Roundtree, Dave Moyer, and Oliver Purnell pushed everyone in practice. They sacrificed potential starting roles at other schools to come off the bench at Old Dominion.
So if you could execute in practice the fast break and your press, then you got to a game, but the other team didn't know what you were doing. It made it a little bit easier.
Old Dominion went on to win 9 of their next 11 games. That included an 84-73 win over California to win the Kiwanis Classic. Washington joined the team after sitting out a year due to transfer rules. He played his first game during the streak, a 101-79 win over Bloomsburg. After a 3-game skid in January, the Monarchs quickly corrected their issues and peeled off 10 wins to close the regular season, including the double overtime mayhem at Randolph-Macon. The winning streak, in part, was due to the overwhelming advantage that the Monarchs had at the ODU Fieldhouse, the school's home before Chartway Arena. The tightly packed arena held about 5,000 people who made it their mission to deafen each other and overwhelm the visitors. Fans smashed together one thing in particular to disorient opponents.
These wooden blocks.
Those wooden blue 2x4 blocks.
Those blocks that were blue and white.
And they used to bang these blocks.
When you would have 5,200 people there, all with those wooden blocks, and the fast break going, and the band going, and it was pretty darn electric.
The Monarchs rode that home court electricity all the way through the South Atlantic Regional Playoffs, where they dismantled Baltimore 95-72, and once again beat Randolph-Macon in the regional finals, this time 83-75. Finally, in March 75, Old Dominion arrived by plane in Evansville, Indiana for the national tournament. They blew past North Dakota 78-62 and Tennessee State 77-60 in the opening rounds to set up a championship bout with New Orleans. The championship game was a back-and-forth affair.
That game came down to both teams were tired, and it was like survival of the fittest.
Washington had a strong first half with 19 points, but was stymied in the second after New Orleans double-teamed him. He finished with just 21 points.
I wish I could have gotten the ball, done a little more in the second half. And it's been so long now, I don't know if they made a brilliant adjustment, because with 19 first half points, obviously they needed to make some kind of adjustment.
Old Dominion led 76-74 with 7 seconds remaining. Joey Carruthers stepped to the free throw line for a 1-and-1 opportunity and a chance to seal a win. The first shot went up, and it clanked off the front iron.
Wilbur Holland got the rebound, dribbled length of the court, went up for a shot in the lane to tie the game, and Oliver Purnell was right in his face, and he missed it, and we won.
They had just clinched the championship, but that miss still sticks with Carruthers all these years later.
That miss, it's I'm not going to say it's haunted me because we won he missed a shot, we won the game. But it's something that I'll remember my entire life.
The team sprinted out on the court, jumped, and cut down the nets to cap off a remarkable season. Washington won the tournament's Most Outstanding Player award. Here is Coach Allen interviewed in the locker room right after the game.
Well, Coach, what you got there?
This is championship ball. It's a great feeling, and I think we deserve it. We came a long way. We won 25 ball games, and the kids have worked hard. The fans have supported us, and we won 15 in a row. We deserve to be national champs.
The real celebration began when they got back to Norfolk.
Toilet paper everywhere.
We come out of the tunnel and all that. Coach Allen's got the trophy, and there's just a throng of people into the airport lobby.
There's probably 2,000 people at the airport waiting for us. So they had a celebration right there.
Shortly after the championship, Sonny Allen decided to leave for a job at Division I Southern Methodist. He made it a point to not recruit his Old Dominion players to his new school.
But Joey and Furr and Wilson were all just sophomores. He just said, I just wouldn't feel right taking them right now.
Asked about the team's legacy 50 years later, Washington put it emphatically.
We had fun. And we've been champions all of our adult life. And can't change that, all right? Cannot change that.
Old Dominion plans to honor the 1974-75 team at a home game later this season. Connor Worley, WHRO News.
You've been listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition. We had help today from WHRO's Ryan Murphy, Catherine Hafner, Steve Walsh, Sienna Morales, Barry Graham, and Nick McNamara. Also, thanks as always to Connor Worley, who produced today's show. A reminder that you can always catch full episodes on the Weekly Edition podcast feed And you can get your news updates at WHRO.org and the WHRO Reports podcast feed. For all of us at WHRO and WHRV, I'm Doug Boynton. Happy New Year. Stay safe. Be well.